Jane ഇല്ലേ?
അൺമ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്യണം.
ജെയിൻ അൺമ്യൂട്ട് ചെയ്തിട്ടില്ല.
വേറൊരു മീറ്റിംഗിലാണ്.
ശരി.
ഏറ്റുമാനൂർ ബ്രാഞ്ച് ഇൻസ്റ്റലേഷൻ അവിടെ. ഏറ്റുമാനൂർ ബ്രാഞ്ച്
കഴിഞ്ഞോ?
അതാരാണ് ഇൻസ്റ്റലേഷൻ? ജെയിനാണോ?
മ്യൂട്ടായി.
നമ്മളൊക്കെ സാധാരണ ഇൻസ്റ്റലേഷൻ സ്റ്റേറ്റ് പ്രസിഡന്റ്.
ശരി. ഓക്കെ
സാറേ, വി ക്യാൻ സ്റ്റാർട്ട്. നമുക്ക്
ഓക്കെ, ഫേസ്ബുക്കിൽ ലൈവ് ആയിട്ടാ. നമുക്ക് തുടങ്ങാം. തുടങ്ങാലോ അരുൺ? പവൻ
തുടങ്ങാം.
സ്റ്റാർട്ട്
ചെയ്യാം. ഓക്കെ, the meeting is called to order. We start with a silent prayer.
ജോസഫ്, ഫ്ലാഗ് സല്യൂട്ടേഷൻ ഉണ്ടോന്ന്?
And thank you. Flag salutation by Secretary Dr. Pawan Madhusudan. Pawan. Hello, Pawan. Out here.
Yes.
Okay.
Flag salutation. We, the members of Indian Medical Association, stand here to salute our national flag. Its honor and glory shall be our light and strength, and its course shall be our course. We pledge our allegiance to it, and realizing our responsibilities as the accredited members of this national organization, we swear we will dedicate everything in our power to see it fly high in the comity of nations. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dr. Pawan. Now, presidential address. Respected State Joint Secretary Dr. Jain Chimman, today's faculty Dr. Dilip Raman, intensivist, cloud physician, healthcare systems, Secretary Dr. Pawan Madhusudanan, and my dear senior colleagues and dear friends. Good evening to all. Today we are conducting a webinar on tele-ICU, and I welcome you all to this webinar. This is conducting because there is a specific reason for that. Because of the COVID pandemic is surging at an alarming rate, and our ICU fraternity are getting exhausted and overstrained with more and more doctors and nurses are getting infected. We are going into a grave situation. I fear we may be falling short of ICU doctors. To overcome such a situation, we may have to manage ICUs with minimum manpower on the floor. How can we manage such a situation? Yes, we may have to find an alternative, and I hope today we will get an answer from Dr. Dilip Raman, and let us listen to him through his talk on today. And he's an intensivist, and to introduce Dr. Dilip Raman, before introducing, I invite Dr. Jain Chimman, our State Joint Secretary, for his address. Over to you, Dr. Jain Chimman. Dr. Jain, are you here?
Jain sir, we are in the meeting.
Then Pawan, you just introduce Dr. Dilip Raman to the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Joy. So good evening, senior members and my dear friends. Let me take this opportunity to introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Dilip Raman, who is the co-founder and director of the Cloud Physician Healthcare Private Limited, which is a Bangalore-based healthcare tech company. Cloud Physician is a 400+ bed tele-ICU setup. It's a network powered by a platform called Radar. Coming to Dr. Dilip Raman, he's a consultant intensivist at Aveshka Hospital and Site Care Hospital at Bangalore. And also he's a consultant tele-intensivist for many hospitals in USA, including Florida, Milwaukee, Kentucky, etc., and also in many metro Indian cities. He's a medical graduate from Thrissur Medical College. He's a 2006 pass out batch. And later on, he was a chief fellow in pulmonology and critical care at Cleveland Clinic Respiratory Institute. He also did his fellowship in sleep medicine at Cleveland Clinic. And also he has a lot of publications in numerous international journals. And with this short introduction, I welcome Dr. Dilip to give a session on the relevance of tele-ICU in the present pandemic setup in Kerala. Welcome, Dr. Dilip.
Before start the session, Dr. Jain Chiman, can you have a small address?
Thank you, President Joyce, sir. I should again congratulate you for coming out with such wonderful programs. This is actually, today's topic is very relevant for today's times because, as you know, the number of COVID cases are increasing. The number of COVID patients who require ventilatory support and also ICU management are on the rise. And with the increasing in number, we are afraid that the existing doctors or existing interventionists who are qualified in catering to the ICU management will be sufficient to cater to the increasing number of COVID patients who are requiring ventilatory support or ICU management. So this is going to be an eye-opener for us, and this is going to be a future of our ICU management, what our ICU management will be like in the days to come. I'm sure we'll all be able to take home some beautiful messages today on how to manage the ICU in the near future. Definitely, this is going to be a great help to doctors because we are short of manpower. We are short of qualified manpower. So this is the way. This is the answer. And I'm sure today's esteemed speaker will enlighten us on to how to manage the ICU in a more efficient way. Thank you. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jain Chiman. Now over to Dr. Dilip Raman for his talk. Over to you, Dr. Dilip Raman.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the kind and generous introduction. Thrissur is obviously very close to my heart. I trained there, so really happy to be amongst you and with this esteemed group. As pointed out rightly, my background is in critical care, pulmonary, sleep medicine, and general medicine. But we have been doing this technology-based critical care for about 3 years now, both pre-COVID and obviously during the COVID pandemic. I want to share with you how this tool has been important in our day-to-day work here based out of Bangalore and helping multiple states in India. And how, just like any other tool, it has to be used wisely. So without much ado, I'll start my presentation. Full disclosure, I am the director of a healthcare technology company. So just want to put that up front while we discuss this use case. As you all know, and as doctors have suggested before, there is a huge shortage of qualified intensivists. Intensivists are critical care specialists who are specifically trained in ICU medicine in anywhere between 1 to 3 year fellowships across the world. And it is one of the most effective interventions known to improve survival. So critical care is a relatively young specialty in India, but in other parts of the world, it is more defined and far more structured in the sense that when you know, where cardiology was 20, 30 years ago, that is where critical care is today. For instance, 20, 30 years ago, if you had an MI, a non-cardiologist would feel fairly confident and say, I can manage this with thrombolysis or any typical management of MI that persisted. But today, even the lay public knows that they need to go to a cardiologist for the management of an MI. So much so that it is not even a question. Similarly, in the field of critical care, there is an evolution. And that evolution is where people are realizing that to manage complex cases like ARDS and for optimal outcomes, you need an ICU, you need trained ICU nurses, and leading that team, you need an intensivist. So that is now pretty much commonplace in most of the Western world, and it is catching on in India. But the shortage in India is massive. And to put it in context, is that almost more than 90% of hospitals in India do not have a qualified intensivist. That is the reality across metro cities, tier 2 cities, government institutions and private institutions. It's very, very rare. And this problem statement is obviously exacerbated by COVID. This was a problem before COVID. This slide was from the pre-COVID era. And it is even more true now because COVID is acting like a stress test on the entire system. In and of itself, it is a little bit more severe than flu perhaps, but the way in which it is impacting us is because of its impact on the healthcare system. And that is the issue here. And with that issue at hand, what tele-ICUs are is that they are a technology-based force multiplier. On a typical day in round, someone like the doctors in my team would cover rounds and maybe round on about 10 to 15 patients. That's the maximum that an intensivist can do. But with the tele-ICU platform or a smart ICU platform, the intensivist skill and expertise is maximized. What it does is that it allows the intensivist to talk and interact with the bedside team and impart his or her intensive care expertise to 60 to 80 patients. That has a lot of utility in today's day and age, especially with the problem which we are facing right now. As an example, on your right on the screen, you will see this young boy. This ICU is in rural Bihar, and it's pre-COVID, who had ARDS from an undefined pneumonia. This hospital has an anesthesiologist, but does not have a full-time intensivist. And Patna, which is a larger city, was about 2.5 hours away. There was no way that this child would make the transfer because the saturations were between 60 and 75%, and without optimal treatment, he would not make it. We were supporting this ICU with our platform and our services round the clock, and we were able to teach and train the bedside to do prone ventilation. Of course, prone ventilation now is commonplace given the COVID pandemic, but at that point in time, this hospital had never even tried this method of trying to help a patient. And we were able to guide them, upskill them, and train them in a short span of time within a few hours. And this therapy was instituted. And luckily, over the next 12 to 14 days, he made a full recovery and he's back in school where he belongs. Here, technology is just is an enabler. And that enabler is what makes this happen. And this is to give you a glimpse. This is our office in Bangalore, for instance, where you have a team of intensivists and nurses who are trained and experienced in critical care and are able to cover a large number of patients, talking to the bedside doctor, bedside team, and helping with day-to-day ICU care and practice. As you can see, the communication has to be real-time, and the platform that you're using has to be robust enough to support this level of care. Now, coming to the peer-reviewed evidence on critical care and tele-critical care, again, the West has taken the lead. So tele-ICU is not a new concept. It's about 15 years or 20 years old. There are various models that exist in the US, papers published in JAMA, CHEST, the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine, frequently indicate that there is an improved quality, there is an adherence to best practices, and a lower risk of complications and medical errors. And this has been replicated in multiple trials. However, the Indian context is much harder to define because models in India have been very heterogeneous and have been plagued by cost constraints and how the technology that was designed for the West didn't have a direct use case in India. That said, some of our internal data, which is not yet published, is in front of you right now. This is from a hospital in Uttar Pradesh, where they didn't have an intensivist, but only had an on-call anesthesiologist who would probably round in the ICU between 2 to 4 hours a day. And we were able to show an impact on the mortality over a course of 3 months, adjusted for their Apache scores. And to us, this was a defining moment because it made us understand that even in resource-limited settings, this can create an impact. Another impact that we published in Resuscitation, which is the official journal of the ERC, European Resuscitation Council, is something known as tele-CPR. Again, tele-CPR or tele-ICU augmented CPR is very common in the West. 12 to 15% of all US ICUs, for example, have a functioning tele-ICU system. There, the intensivist remotely can guide the bedside team to comply with ACLS and BLS protocols to make sure that there is a high quality of bedside CPR. Those of you familiar with critical care and CPR would know that high quality CPR is a cornerstone that determines return of spontaneous circulation when faced with a cardiac arrest. So we did this in our setting, which is a 25 patient case series where our team from Bangalore was helping with the tele CPR process. And this is now routine in our network, where when CPR happens, our team is the team leader for the CPR, and the bedside duty doctors and nurses follow best practices. We minimize time between compressions. We optimize delivery of drugs like epinephrine and the timing of the shocks. And that's what would result in a favorable outcome. Looking at rational antibiotic use across the network, this is another study that we had published in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, where we've looked at network-wide use of antibiotics. And in India, inappropriate antibiotic use is a huge problem, as many of you have realized and already know of. And drug resistance is an emerging problem. And what we found that most of the ICUs, especially surgical ICUs, almost 95% of surgical ICUs were not compliant with recommended post-surgical antibiotic use. So these are just some of the use cases of a tele-ICU. Obviously, there are different use cases, and I just shared a couple of them with you. But coming to the pandemic setting, what I was trying to show was even pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, it's going to be relevant because of the acute shortage we have. But coming to the pandemic deployments that we've done, we are predominantly now serving government hospitals in both Karnataka and Maharashtra, and we've now been doing this for a few months. This is an example of a COVID unit template that we have deployed in Ramnagar in a period of 5 days, where our base requirement is good internet and power, because in a pandemic setting, time is of the essence. You can't spend months designing and deploying an ICU system because time lost is lives at risk. So our system is based more on a vision and a camera-based approach, which makes us able to deploy this at scale. And this is our track record so far. More than 250 ICU beds have already been deployed in the last 4 months. And now as a group, our critical care group has taken care of more than 1,500 COVID patients. And that translates to about 8,000 plus patient bed days with a lot of interventions in all these sites that you can see. Most of these districts are rural districts. Our upcoming deployment in Leh will be one of the most remote deployments that we have made in the government setup, and we're really happy to be able to help the patients in these remote settings. Our team does training at bedside when it is within Karnataka because of COVID restrictions, but when you're outside the boundaries of the state, we have helped with remote deployments as well, where we do training remotely with multiple sessions for both doctors and nurses, and that has made an impact in our bedside presence. The main question is, how do we help with operations and outcomes? And from a track record perspective, even though we have more than 350 beds, we had to redefine how we are looking at our COVID sites. So with a backup of 14 intensivist qualified people and more than 25 nurses, we have a pervasive approach to how we deal with ICU patients. So we would actually do daily rounds, round the clock management and monitoring. So our nurses and doctors are there, frequent check-ins with the duty doctors at bedside, disconnections of oxygen, ventilator alarms, looking at drips, looking at infusions. It's almost as if we are there. The only thing we can't do is a procedure and maybe percussion and palpation and auscultation. But these things are well compensated by the bedside team who can relay the information to us. Because at the end of the day, high quality critical care is about analyzing the data and the information you have at bedside and making a knowledge-based decision from a critical care angle. So this is one of our 36 beds government ICUs that we helped with, where we have shown a reduction in absolute mortality. The orange dotted line is the sickest cohort according to their Apache score that we stratified. And just by putting in basic bundles, ventilator care bundles, sorry, is there a question?
Hello, please mute your
Sorry,
phone.
yeah, I heard some sound there. So we were able to show a reduction in mortality throughout. This is the Apache score of the same cohort. And as you can see, it's not like we are taking care of lesser sick patients. The overall Apache trend was steady or slightly going up, which you can attribute the decline in the mortality to better teamwork and overall care that we were able to help the bedside with. These are some of the feedback that we received from the district administration. So this is Mr. Ikram, who's the district collector of Ramnagar district, and we were able to demonstrate help with the government framework there during the COVID crisis. So that was a bit of the past, what we have done in the present. And now, like one of the esteemed IMA members was sharing, there are a few things in the future that I would like to share. An ICU is a data pool. There's about 6 GB of data generated every day in an ICU. That's a lot of information, both medical, allied medical, clinical, plenty of information here. And it's an integration of the bedside nurses, radiology, IT team. And this information is only going to get bigger. You will have protocols, you'll have a lot of paper records, electronic medical records, if that is something that is going to be part of upgrades. And these are some things that we've already done at a lot of our bedside centers. CDS, or a clinical decision support system, and how to deal with alarms in an intelligent way are problems that are going to come to the bedside. And these problems ideally need to be dealt with a seamless system, and that system needs to have a low barrier. So one of the problems in the US is that tele-ICU systems are extraordinarily cost prohibitive. So it takes millions of dollars to deploy the system, and that in India is a massive barrier. You cannot have a barrier that is so high that the people who need the system are not able to use it. So something that is supposed to be helpful in India is a system that has a low barrier to its use, but solves all the problems on the left-hand side of the screen. That is how you will need to evaluate a system that can help you. And one of the terms that you will see commonly thrown about is artificial intelligence. We internally, as part of Cloud Physician, and from a philosophy standpoint as well, are looking at artificial intelligence differently. We think maybe it has a role, but right now the most important role is to augment human intelligence. So that augmentation of human intelligence also needs technology. And that we feel is a stepping stone to a future goal. So to give you an example, an analytics engine that is running will need to incorporate device data, monitors data, video coming in from the streams, and looking at patient data that's already part of the platform. And that is what would inform the clinician. That is what would inform the bedside provider to take better care of the patients. And there are a lot of additional pieces that go into play: speech analysis, optical character recognition, computer vision, analyzing waveforms. So I may not be able to share all of it with you, but I can give you a glimpse of how we do it in Bangalore. So for example, you can see how detailed and defined the screen can get, because in our platform, you are able to zoom in with these cameras that we have loaded our firmware on and get very crisp and pristine views of the ICU ventilator. You can look at these ventilator settings, you can analyze these settings, and you can actually interpret them and help the bedside team look at the monitor and the waveforms and help them with acute events. So for example, an experienced nurse from the command center could look at the drugs, could look at the infusion pumps and see if the drug dosing and the rates are correct. And we do this routinely. In one of our government clients just today, we picked up a patient who has a lot of respiratory distress. Atracurium, a paralytic, was already ordered so that the patient could tolerate and be synchronous with the ventilator. But the nursing team was so stretched that they couldn't pick up that the drug was already empty. And what our team did was alerted them that the medication has already finished infusing, and the nurses who are short-staffed could be alerted that this patient needed immediate attention. So it's a mix of both management and monitoring that is going to happen real time and allows better care to be delivered at bedside. Here in front of you is another video of our platform, for instance, that can look at the bedside monitor, and using computer vision and machine learning algorithms allows the nurse to get the data directly to the platform, increasing the nursing efficiency and allowing them to document faster and better. So here you're seeing that the machine is automatically recognizing the number 79 as heart rate. It's automatically recognizing the saturation as 93 and plugging these data points onto the platform directly. So these are some of the things that I was talking about, and I wanted to show you real life examples of what we are doing with this technology. So here, I just wanted to share that, you know, right now a command center is where you have doctors and nurses talking to the bedside, using platforms such as a conferencing platform to communicate stuff with the bedside, looking at quality metrics like I was mentioning, bundles, spontaneous breathing trials, DVT prophylaxis, things that make a difference to the bedside. But in the future, technology would help them be a part of an integrated part of the ICU team. It would help nurses, nurse practitioners, allied health practitioners to be a more robust part of the entire framework, meaning that they would be able to support the tele-ICU team, deliver better care at bedside when faced with a staff shortage at the bedside. And this would result in a better quality of life, not just for the providers, but also improved work dynamics and improved impact of their working. This is completely different from all the patient-centric things that I've already mentioned, which deals with outcomes, how patients are treated, and overall quality and reduction of medical errors. So overall, one of the messages that we have is that clinicians will need to morph from just looking at bedside manner and incorporating website manner and communication as part of their strengths. This is a trainable, teachable skill, and we see this playing a greater role when technology becomes a part of our day-to-day life and practice. So even though technology is not going to replace, technology may replace a lot of things and help you with taking care of the patient, it is going to not replace the interpersonal aspects of healthcare delivery. That is still well within the domain of traditional practitioners right now. And I'd like to conclude by saying, and I said this before, and these are not my words, they've been repeated in the technology and the healthcare circle before, is that technology may not replace doctors, but doctors who use technology will replace doctors who don't. Because that is the way in which healthcare is progressing, and technology is going to play a deeper and deeper role. And the COVID pandemic has sort of brought that to the fore, and it's even more important than what it was pre-pandemic. So I'll stop here for questions, you know, and see if we can make this a more open-ended and open forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dilip Raman. Hello, can you hear?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear. Please go ahead.
Can you hear? I am Dr. Sugadan from Kodungalur. Hello.
Screen
Yes,
sharing.
doctor, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Can you hear, Dr. Dilip?
Dilip, Dr. Dilip.
Dilip, can you hear?
Screen sharing, can you disable?
I don't want.
Okay,
Thank
okay. Now you talk.
I can hear you.
Hello.
No problem.
Hello, Dilip. I want to talk to you on one question. Okay, can you hear me? Hear me?
He can hear you. We can hear you. You carry on.
See, according to his tele-ICU CPR, no, I think it is not applicable to Kerala, because I think all our staff, even in the rural Kerala, most of the people, staff nurse, even not only staff nurse, even junior doctors and the consultants are able to manage CPR even without tele. If you are waiting for tele, by the time the patient will be no more. Why he say that tele ICU CPR? I don't know. Then next question is tele. What is the difference? What is the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic difference? What is his opinion? I don't know. What is the difference between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? What is the difference? There is no difference between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. After all, the treatment of ICU management is, even if it is a pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, is the same. Then last, my question is if you compare with the Western standard, I think we are better than others. That is my opinion. For the last 40 years of my experience, I say that my staff, I am managing more than 40 COVID patients without any problem, and all the people were discharged without any problem. Not only one or two patients were NIV mode ventilation only, not intubated, and all the people, and I have given maximum support to my staff, and they have already trained. As you said, emergency medicine is very good. He is highlighting the importance of emergency medicine. Of course, it is very good. If it is possible, it is better. But I think even otherwise, the consultant, if they are qualified, they can manage. And if there is a problem, the consultants of this specialty like pulmonologist or a neurosurgeon, or I am a neurosurgeon, but in spite of my neurosurgery, I am managing my critical care patients. All my critical care patients, I intubated and ventilated. All my surgery patients, post-operative, all these patients, even gynec post-operative patient, everything I meant. Don't think that we are substandard. Don't compare with the Western standard. We Kerala people are not that bad. See, you go and Dilip, you have to think it is not Karnataka, it is Kerala. I know my son is working there at Bangalore. I am very afraid of him because he is working there, and I am very afraid of him because the mortality rate, infectivity rate, fatality rate, everything is more higher than Kerala. No doubt. There is not. So don't hesitate to say. If you are waiting for an ICU, tele-ICU, by the time the patient will be normal. So we have already given CPR management, and I think we have almost all Kerala nurses and all the periphery people know how to give CPR, how to manage the people, what is the pulse oximeter, saturation and all. If the patient is having less than 90% of saturation, definitely I at least at this moment, at the present moment, I will put at least a NIV mode ventilation. Before intubating, I have to get a antigen test. If the antigen test is positive, I have to take all my precautions, and then I will do that. This has to be done all over the world, and it should be done all over the world. If you are against it, I am Dr. Sugadan. I got the before you. I don't know. May 6th, I got the WHO the certificate that I passed the examination of the COVID examination. No one in the world passed the examination on May 6th, and even after that, nobody has passed. So that is why I am every day, 11 o'clock, director, somebody is coming and talking me from WHO, and I am giving all my reports every day. But unfortunately, nowadays, something is leaking, like because our testing is low, then our mortality is infectivity is low. What is the mortality? Mortality is same. See, for the last 1 month, mortality in Kerala is 20, 21, 22, 22, 23, 23. That means infectivity is the same. Infectivity is going up or down. But infectivity rate, if they go, I don't want to disturb you. I want to tell you. I want to get you one thing only. Can you compare with the Western standard? And I think we are better than. And then what you said is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I don't think. What is the difference between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? How do you say that ICU management? Is there any difference between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic? That is what I want to know, because other things what you said is nothing new. There is nothing new. You said it is tele, but we don't even, most of the rural India, see, you compare the Madhya Pradesh and Kerala, you are living in Bangalore, we are living in India, you compare with the Rajasthan, so many other remote area of India, so many people in Gujarat, Bihar, Orissa, so many other places, remote area where there is not even a single tele, even if we are talking each other, but nobody has not even a single person can you save a person in a rural India with cardiac arrest or whatever it may be? Maybe.
We have Dr. Dilip back.
Okay,
Hi,
for
this is Dr.
I
Dhruv
stop
here.
it.
If I can just address Dr. Sugatan for a second.
Okay,
No,
thank you. I stop it.
Yeah, thanks,
Dilip.
Dr. Sugatan. That's great. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Dr. Dhruv. I'm also a pulmonologist, intensivist. I also work with Dr. Dilip. I think great points and a phenomenal effort to you for being up to date with COVID and also managing your ICU so well. I think the point. Firstly, I just like to state that while Dilip and me and many others, while we use tele-ICU to manage many places, and we are both very cognizant that Dilip has lived in Kerala for a long time and even studied in Kerala. All his education was there. We understand that Kerala is better in a lot of metrics, but at the same time, the question is, how can we improve care? That is really the question. And to start with, Dr. Sugatan, I would say that there are very, very large systems in the United States that Dilip and I are a part of that use tele-ICUs to improve their metrics. Their metrics, the ones that they have in terms of doctor-patient ratio, the specialists available, nurses available, the training available, are far higher than what you would find in Kerala. These are not even remote centers in the US. These are very highly advanced centers, but they use it as a means to further improve the care that they are delivering. Their goal is not to state that somebody is less or somebody is more, but rather it is to state that how can we get better and how can we improve from wherever we are. So with that background, what I would state is with regard to things like CPR, that while you may have very well-trained nurses and doctors, one of the things that you should look at and probably measure, and the only way to check how well you're doing is actually to measure, and to measure in terms of compliance with metrics. How well are you doing? How quickly are you responding to a CPR? What is your rate of CPR recovery? How quickly your nurses are able to identify abnormal rhythms, whether they need to be shocked, whether they don't need to be shocked, how quickly they are able to identify the cause of the arrest and deal with it. These are all metrics that can be measured, and these are all things that tele-ICUs help with. We are there in real time, available as a support system for the nurses, as well trained as they may be, to help them pick up these things and improve from whatever their standard may be. So the point here that I think Dilip is trying to make is not that Kerala is substandard in any way, but I think we are all in agreement that Kerala has one of the best metrics in terms of healthcare in the country. Rather, it is to just have a little bit of humility in healthcare delivery and say, how can we get better than what we are already? And there are ways and means to get better. Some of them involve training, some of them involve upskilling people, some of them may involve hiring more people, getting more experts, some of them may involve utilizing technology. And the tele-ICU is one such means that can be used in a cost-effective way to help improve some of those metrics. That's really what we are trying to state, Dr. Sugatan, and not to demean in any way the care that you are providing to your patients, or by saying that you are substandard in any way. I don't think that is the intention.
No, so Dhruv, just I can.
I'm very sorry. It is not. It is not the fault of the Dr. Dilli. He has mentioned a very, very, very good presentation and everything. I agree. But the thing is, the basic life support message (BLS) has been given to even our auto rickshaw drivers. That is what is happening in rural India, especially Kerala. Okay,
Dr.
that
Subrahman,
should be that is the basics. Dr. Dilip. Okay, thank you.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, Dr. Sugan, let me just unpack that a little bit. So nobody is saying that people don't know BLS. We're very happy about that. But we don't have metrics to show what is the return of spontaneous circulation rate in hospital cardiac arrest. We don't know that. It's a black hole. It's a data black hole. Are you logging all your cardiac arrests with the defined ACLS protocols? Do you have a code blue sheet in your hospital? If you don't have a code blue sheet in your hospital, how are you going to measure this? How are you going to find out what percentage of patients
we
with
have.
VTAC or VFib
We
recover?
have
Do you
code
have a
blue. We have code blue. We announce immediately code blue in mic and all the people will be there in the same. And this is even in a rural Kerala. This is what is happening. It's a municipal area. See, not Bangalore city corporation and all, but Kerala. Many of the hospitals, especially multi-specialty hospitals, and even of course, I don't think that it's a clinic. It is not a, even in some clinic, they will refer to the nearest hospital where it is facility, where there is a cardiologist or somebody is there. If there is a ventilator, we will manage the patient. How many patients I have been managed for the last 40 years? I know how many. You are very, very young, just like എന്റെ മകന്റെ പ്രായമുള്ളൂ ദിലീപ്. So you be careful. How many patients I have saved? More than thousands. I say even more
that's
than
amazing.
thousands.
Then
See, more than 40 within the 40 years of my
Sudan sir,
experience.
Hello.
please give others also to
Dr.
have a
Sudan.
chance.
Okay,
I think
Dr.
you're-
Sudan,
I don't want to
Let him
talk
please,
answer.
please give others also a
Okay,
chance
Yeah,
to.
let him answer. Let him answer.
Let me just
He has
unpack and
just
answer. This is
bought this.
Yeah, true.
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree with the points you're making. Just to I can share some hard numbers.
Dilip, let's not
extubation
make it
rate
one to
and-
one. Dilip, let's not make it one to one. Okay, let others have. I think it is. Yeah, it is fairly understood.
Okay, very
Yes.
good.
Who is the moderator? Please take over.
Okay. Okay, anybody has got the questions? If you want to. Anybody
can I
else?
address the outcomes part?
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that was a
definitely.
valid question.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make it one to one. I'm just going to present the facts.
Okay.
The outcome of intubated patients in Karnataka is that less than 5% of patients who are intubated actually survive. The outcomes of COVID ARDS in the West is that between 40 and 50% patients who have been intubated survive. These are sobering facts. So the actual case fatality rate may be low, and that is because maybe we have a younger population, maybe the overall risk is different. That's great. We should be happy about that. But the ICU outcomes of intubated patients is considerably worse in India and in many parts of India. And the overall caseload volumes in Kerala has not yet exhausted the system. If and when it exhausts, we are concerned that the shortage of nurses and doctors may result in higher than expected ICU mortalities when compared to the West. That is a simple fact, unfortunately.
That is great. What Dr. Dilip is talking is correct. 100% agree with.
Sir, ഞാനൊന്ന് പറഞ്ഞോട്ടെ.
Yes. Carry on.
Being the present system, the doctors has to accommodate all the new things that are coming, because that only will help us in our future management. That is what I have understood. This is a very good suggestion and very good thing to follow it up. Dr. Sugadan is doing extremely good work. There is no criticism about it. But we have to accommodate all the new things that are coming. That is my humble view. So what is the cost involved in this?
Yeah, so the cost is variable and based on a per patient basis. But to give you a comparison and a detailed analysis will require understanding how many beds, how we are deploying, what is the patient load, what is the net occupancy of the hospital, and what is the overall acuity of the patients. Because it's a format that kind of works on scale. So like I was telling you before, what we are trying to do is offset the requirement of the intensivist. So if one intensivist can help with maybe 10 ICUs, then that reduces the cost to run for these individual spoke ICUs, and it also increases the efficiency on one side. So generally, if you're looking at this as a per bed rate, it can vary from between 1,800 to 2,200 rupees per bed per day, depending on the ICU. But that's a rough ballpark because we'll need to figure out what the local requirements are and local dynamics are.
What will be the initial expense, like other than the per bed? That what you told is at the later stage. But initially, we'll have to invest for the gadgets and all.
Yeah. So depends. Like if you are, let's say, using like a Philips or a GE platform, the upfront cost per bed can be pretty expensive. It can be between 2 and 3 lakhs per bed in some cases as well. Looking at the overall cost required, because some of them require monitor and equipment upgrades, and it's very cost prohibitive. Some of the models that we look at, say for about 5 beds or so, can be in the 3 lakh ballpark totally for the entire 5 to 6 bed ICU as a one time.
Our
So it's
ICU
like
is 15 bedded ICU.
We'll have to do a site evaluation of that ICU, but the highest I could think for a 15 bed from a low
With all
cost.
the multi-para monitors.
Sorry?
With all multi-para monitors
Yeah,
on each bed.
it may be in the range of around 4 to 5 lakhs, maybe 6 lakhs, depending on the layout of the ICU. Because one of the solutions we use is very computer vision centric. So if you have a lot of pillars or something there, then we need to accommodate those pillars and design a camera overview that can cover every monitor and every patient carefully. So it's variable. It will be in that range, between 5.5 and 6 lakhs. Let's say if you have a lot of pillars and a lot of barriers. But again, usually what we do is we either require a video walkthrough of the ICU or just an overall view and a floor plan to decide how much it would cost. But again, it would be like an order of magnitude, more cost effective than, like, let's say, a device-based model like Philips or GE, like I was mentioning.
See, in CPR, you were saying that the monitoring is there. Is it just the human supervision, or you have some gadgets to know the quality of the CPR?
So we don't have a CPR quality measurement device. There are those obviously present that give live feedback to see the quality, but at this point it is all human intervention, but it is more centric on the timing. Timing is where we make the most impact, because quality of CPR depends on the training. Like Dr. Sugadan was pointing out, you need to be well trained. But in our initial deployments, we do provide and educate on CPR training.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
So
you,
are
Dr.
based in
Dilip.
Bangalore?
Any more questions?
Thank you, Dr. Dilip, for your fantastic presentation. Of course, Dr. Paisar, we are not, നമ്മള് പുറകിലേക്ക് പോകുന്നില്ല, മുന്നോട്ട് തന്നെ പോകുന്നില്ല. 11 മണി വരെ ഞാൻ എല്ലാ പ്രോഗ്രാംസും കാണുന്നുണ്ട്. അതിന്റെ പൈസാറിനോട് ഞാൻ പ്രത്യേകം പറയണേ, see, I am updating, how I updating, because I am alone here. എന്റെ സണ്ണും മകനും ഇവിടെ ഇല്ല, എല്ലാവരും യൂറോപ്പിലൊക്കെയാണ്. അപ്പൊ then I have only time is I have to spend my time for 11 up to 11:30 for updating this. What she said is correct, but is it practicable in Kerala? Before that, before that we have even basic line, even ഓട്ടോറിക്ഷക്കാർക്ക് പോലും നമ്മൾ ബേസിക് ലൈഫ് സപ്പോർട്ട് കൊടുക്കുന്നുണ്ട്. ദാറ്റ്സ് ദ മോസ്റ്റ് ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ്. അത് കൊടുക്കാനുള്ള ആ സന്നദ്ധത നമ്മൾ മധ്യപ്രദേശിലും ബീഹാറിലും ഒറീസയിലും ഗുജറാത്തിലും ഛത്തീസ്ഗഡിലും ചണ്ഡീഗഡിലും ഒന്നും ചെയ്യുന്നില്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മൾ കേരള ഈസ് ഫാർ ബെറ്റർ എന്ന് ഞാൻ പറയുന്നുള്ളൂ. നോ ഡൗട്ട്. ഈവൻ
സുഗതൻ സാറ്, ഞാൻ ഡോക്ടർ പോൾ, ഞാൻ അമല ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിൽ വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇത് പറയുന്നത് എന്ന് വെച്ചിട്ടുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ ഈ സിറ്റുവേഷനിൽ ദർ വിൽ ബി ലാക്ക് ഓഫ് ഹെൽത്ത് കെയർ വർക്കേഴ്സ്. ഇപ്പോഴത്തെ ഇതിൽ വി ഹാവ് ടു ഓപ്പൺ മോർ ആൻഡ് മോർ ഓഫ് ICUs ആൻഡ് ദിസ് വിൽ ബി ഓഫ് സം ഹെൽപ്പ്. ദാറ്റ് ഇസ് വാട്ട് ദേ ആർ സെയിങ്. ഈ മോണിറ്ററിംഗ് ആണ് ഇഷ്യൂസ്.
ആ മോണിറ്ററിങ്ങിന് സമയമൊന്നും കിട്ടില്ല. See, if you want to give a CPR to a patient, how much time you will get for monitoring? നിങ്ങൾ ഈ ടെലിമെഡിസിനിൽ
CPRന്റെ കാര്യമല്ല, ഇപ്പോ നമ്മൾ കോവിഡ് സിനാരിയോനെ പറ്റിയിട്ടാണ് സാറേ
സംസാരിക്കുന്നത്.
Talking about COVID, and at present in our hospital we are shortage of the doctors to work in ICU. We have to increase the strength of the ICUs. അപ്പോൾ അങ്ങനത്തെ ഒരു സിറ്റുവേഷനിൽ ദിസ് വിൽ ഡെഫിനറ്റ്ലി ഹെൽപ്പ് ടു സർട്ടൻ എക്സ്റ്റെന്റ്, ബട്ട് ദ പ്രൊസീജിയേഴ്സ് ഹാസ് ടു ബി ഡൺ ബൈ ദ ഡോക്ടേഴ്സ്. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് ഫോർ ഷുവർ.
Rafael, as you said, you have 15 beds in ICU, and you have only one staff nurse in the ICU, and you are posting only one because there is shortage of staff nurse.
അങ്ങനെയല്ല സാറേ, we have ventilated patients and it is 1:1 ratio we have. We still have to open 3 ICUs more. So in that case, like this will help to certain extent. അത്ര മാത്രമാണ് ഡോക്ടർ ദിലീപ്
നമുക്ക് ദിലീപ് പറഞ്ഞത് 100% ഞാൻ
what we want is to hear from an expert in this field. What we want to hear about this from an expert in this field. അപ്പൊ അതിന് കടമേനം ഇടയിൽ നമ്മൾ തന്നെ സംസാരിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാല് പിന്നെ അതിന്റെ
അവര് എക്സ്പെർട്ട് തന്നെയാണ്, ഇല്ലെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞില്ലല്ലോ. പക്ഷെ
ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻസ് ചോദിക്കാനുള്ളവരുണ്ടാവും.
ഞാൻ രവി സാറേ ഞാൻ വിട്ടു, ചോദിച്ചോട്ടെ. എനിക്കല്ല സംശയം ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ചോദിക്കാൻ പറ്റുള്ളൂ. സാറേ സംശയമുള്ളവർക്കല്ലേ സാറേ രവി സാറെ ചോദിക്കാൻ പറ്റുള്ളൂ, അല്ലാത്തവർക്ക് ചോദിക്കാൻ പറ്റില്ല.
How many staff?
Doctor, we have 14 intensivists and 28 nurses now in Bangalore. Out of the 28 nurses, about 70% are senior critical care nurses with about 6 to 9 years of critical care experience.
Yeah, how much will be your charge for per? I mean, not for the capital investment, but agreement how much will be the approximate?
He said 1,800 to 2,200 per bed.
Yes.
18,200.
1,800 to 2,200 per bed.
Per bed. Oh, that's very reasonable.
So there are just so many challenges that we have seen in the last 6 to 8 months. The good thing about Kerala is Kerala has time. And Kerala has bought time because of its initial extraordinary response to what has happened. What we do with that time is up to us.
Do you charge for the monitor besides the bed?
No, only for occupied beds.
No extra cost for the monitor.
No, we don't place any monitors. We use the existing monitors. That is why we're able to do it at a much lower cost. We don't force any system to buy new monitors or new equipment. The initial camera-based approach is all that will cost the hospital to start this.
Dr. Dilip, just to make some clarity, regarding the charges you mentioned, like approximately 2,000 rupees per bed, that is for each day, right? That is per day charges.
That is per day charges, correct. And like I hinted before, as the scale gets bigger, we can make it cost effective depending on
cost effective, yeah. Like if you have 10 beds in your hospital and it's supported by you, that is like 10 into 2,000, 20,000 per day.
Yes, provided they are occupied beds. We will not be charging for empty beds.
Yeah, I know. Yes.
One more, sir, it is not related to the telemedicine as such, but the ICU infrastructure. Can you say something about that, sir?
Yeah, that's been an extraordinary problem and a revelation, actually. So the bare bones tele-ICU setup that we would recommend is a portable X-ray ABG machine and obviously ventilators and monitors. One thing that we have found in the COVID ICUs is that the average utilization of oxygen will be 6 to 8 times what is your background rate. So one big thing that came through in both the government centers and private centers is that we noticed that these places were running out of oxygen, and you will almost guaranteed to see this problem if you're using HFNC and NIV devices. So the problem here will be that your oxygen pressures will start to fall, and the delivered FiO2 on the ventilator will not match what is set. So for example, if you set 100% on your ventilator, your oxygen pressure will be so low because of excess use that only 20%, 30% or 40% will be delivered. And these would be counted as unexpected deaths because to the untrained eye, they won't be picking this up because it's a subtle ventilator alarm that you need to go digging after. And this has happened time and time again in big hospitals, small hospitals, medium hospitals. So what we strongly recommend is that if you have even 1 or 2 HFNC devices in addition to your NIV or other devices, you should migrate to a liquid oxygen based supply chain, because a jumbo cylinder is just not going to work, unfortunately. One medium-sized or liquid oxygen tank is equivalent to about 25 jumbo cylinders. So large hospitals that have a plant will not have a problem. But the small to medium-sized hospitals that will get saturated and don't have a plant-based delivery of oxygen, that have been surviving on jumbo cylinders, are going to see an oxygen shortage. And that will directly result in lives being lost. So I would focus on that. And the second thing would be obviously nursing expertise and nursing skill. We are not a nursing provider. We can't do, procedures like Dr. Raphael pointed out, but that's not our role. Our role is to augment the critical care decision-making and delivery of skill at scale. So you still need the other things in place. You need oxygen, you need appropriate devices, well-trained nursing staff. Think of a tele-ICU as the icing on the cake. You still need to make the rest of the cake.
Just one more clarification, sir, regarding the air handling units. Is it a must or just opening the windows? How safe it is, and because many places they are doing it like this.
Fantastic question, sir. Actually, see, we had addressed this problem in our write-up in March 26th, because what we had noticed, we were covering some US ICUs as well. So it's a little bit of a time travel, because in February and January, we saw these problems and all the US patients were going into negative pressure rooms and people were wearing PPEs. But in India, with our tropical climate, more so in Kerala, for example, and badly designed ICUs, the problem in ICUs in most of the places is they're using a split air conditioner. There is no laminar flow, there is no HEPA filter, and there is no attention to any micron size less than 5 in most of our ICUs. Unless you are in a transplant ICU with specially designed exhaust, most of the ICUs in India are basically recirculating air without any filters. So we were very, very, very concerned about this, and we wrote a position piece on how to deploy combined ventilation or natural ventilation to reduce the viral load. One of our, you can say predictions, but it was more of a concern, was that healthcare providers will be at increased risk of inoculation of high amount of viral particles because of this recirculation. Because these patients are going to be on high flow, they're going to be coughing. Their baseline minute ventilation itself is about 20 liters per minute, a sick COVID patient. So that itself generates a lot of aerosols. Whether you put them on HFNC or NIV doesn't matter. At baseline, they are generating aerosols. So our concern was that you somehow need to open the ventilation, because you're never going to have enough negative pressure rooms in India to deal with this. So what we suggested was install exhaust, simple Havel exhaust in your ICU, and augment that with an open air ICU concept. This is endorsed by the WHO, and the references I can share with you if you're interested. But this hybrid ventilation, combining both exhaust and natural ventilation, is the only way forward from a safety standpoint. Yes, the outside may see a higher load of aerosols, but at least your overall aerosol burden will be more evenly distributed. So what we recommend is a hybrid ventilation. You use AC for thermal comfort to keep yourself comfortable with the PPEs, but you use natural ventilation to clear the aerosol load. That's the only practical way forward.
Dr. Dilip, yeah, I am Dr. Renis Davis. Fine. I'm at Amala, Professor and Head of the Pulmonology Department. It was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed the way you presented in a concise way and giving an eye opener for even it's Kerala or US or everywhere. It's the tele-ICU is a new concept which I would like to hear from you. It was really great. I heard from you the subject, and I really appreciate the way of your presentation. I really liked it. My questions for you are two. One is the way you manage a COVID ARDS. Do you protocolize it or whether you individualize it?
It has to be individualized. I can wait for your second question and then answer. Sorry.
Yeah, my second question is, do you take up the ECMO service by tele-ICU?
Yeah, so thanks. So the second question is easy to answer. We do not take up ECMO. Sorry, we do not take up ECMO because simply because generally when you have an ECMO, you have fully trained intensivists at bedside, including a large interdisciplinary team. So there's not much of a use case for us in that situation. So while some of us have experience and are trained in ECMO, we do not support ICUs that that have an ECMO because they have a bedside intensivist. However, to your first question, we absolutely have to individualize. And one of the reasons why we have to do that is because we have been following these trends for quite some time. And what is being increasingly noticed is that all COVID ARDSs don't behave the same. Some behave very differently from the regular ARDS, especially if their CT pattern, for example, has a classic OP-like pattern, OP meaning organizing pneumonia. They are more steroid responsive, and they do not, they have a higher risk of relapse actually. Now we have few cases where they were treated with COVID, they heal well, and they come back with classic organizing pneumonia because they were treated only for 10 days per the recovery trial. So in these cases, we individualize their management, we prolong their steroid dose, just like we would treat an organizing pneumonia, and pulmonologists such as yourself would exactly see what I'm trying to say, because organizing pneumonia needs a low dose of steroids for a longer time. And that is what we are seeing in some of these patients. The other subset is the classic H1N1 type ARDS, and they stay on the ventilator for 7 to 14 days. So that is another reason where they will exhaust the healthcare system, because they will jam up all your ICU beds and ventilators as they survive. The other interesting thing you will notice is that the average length of a COVID patient in a US ICU is about 12 to 15 days. The average length that a COVID patient stays on an Indian ICU is between 3 and 7 days. They die in that time frame. And one of the reasons there would be either nursing care that is deficient, or basic ventilator bundles that are not being followed. So these things will also need to be individualized, because COVID patients who have been intubated will tend to survive only after they have had high quality mechanical ventilation for about 13 to 14 days. Because after that phase is when they need the prolonged support. So again, you will have to individualize your entire ventilator strategy there. So to give you an example, in some of our Indian ICUs, we have had to purposely delay intubation because we knew that that remote ICU did not have the nursing backup to make the patient live beyond the 10-day mark. So we had to consciously say that, okay, we'll have to use some form of adapted high oxygenation strategy with either NIV, high flow, or combining nasal cannula with NIV, which is one of the innovative things that we would suggest you all to do if intubation is a problem. So these are the ways we would have to individualize, unfortunately.
You have some protocols for COVID ARDS? Have you evolved some protocols for COVID ARDS?
Yeah, so it's not unique, but it's a mix and match. So for example, instead of using hypoxia as a cutoff for intubation, we have looked at work of breathing as a cutoff, because that is something that in the Indian setting we have found to be more relevant. Because if their tachypnea is very high and the work of breathing is very high, then the patient-induced lung injury is going to be higher. That is the time you need to intubate them in an Indian setting, perhaps. But unfortunately, we don't have longitudinal data to back those claims because it's an evolving situation. And
do you prefer early intubation?
Tailor it not only to the patient.
Do you prefer early
depending
intubation?
on the ICU resources available. We
Do
would
you prefer
early
early
intubation if the ICU resource. Yes, I heard the question. We would prefer early or timely intubation if the bedside has sufficient resources to manage an intubated patient for the next 7 to 10 days.
And what's your experience intubating COVID patients? Whether the outcomes are good or bad?
It's entirely dependent upon the intensive care expertise.
Now, when you are comparing with patients who have intubated early and late.
Yeah, I don't have the entire demographic level knowledge for that, simply because the heterogeneity is very, very varied. You have a different subset of patients in the government setup, different set of patients in the private setup. I can tell you one thing with certainty is that if you have a nursing ratio between 1:3 and 1:4, for example, like maybe in Amala or a higher institute, then you are going to have better outcomes with timely intubation. So I think in COVID, it is probably unfair to say early intubation because that is the term that caused trouble in the earlier part of the epidemic when everybody was doing early ventilation, and that has changed. So now the focus is on timely intubation, and timely is going to be defined differently based on the hospital you work on. So if you're in a government hospital with very scarce resources, timely intubation may be as late as possible. If you have decent nursing manpower, then you would probably draw the line where you have a mix of hypoxia and work of breathing, which, for example, you can use the ROX index. We use the ROX index internally to take a decision on that call. And if you have excellent resources, then maybe you will use another threshold for the ROX index that offers you better outcomes. So when Dr. Rennies asked, how do you individualize? This is how we individualize it. So our recommendation of intubation changes based on the ICU we are covering.
Said the combination of nasal cannula and NIV. Can you
Yes.
highlight more about it?
So there's a little bit of interesting physiology there. Those of you interested in high flow nasal cannula would know that the nasal cannula pushes in air with a very high flow rate, washing out the CO2 from the upper pharynx and the trachea, resulting in a lower work of breathing. Now the problem is many of our ICUs did not have high flow. So what we did as a go-between is we put the nasal cannula, traditional nasal cannula, and then covered it with a standard NIV mask. So they got NIV or CPAP at a rate of about 10 to 12 centimeters of water. And then we increased the oxygen flow to 10 to 15 liters per minute at the nasal cannula, in the hope that we will combine the benefits of high flow nasal cannula and NIV. So what that did is, in many of these patients, you would immediately see that their respiratory rate drops and their work of breathing comes down, which is a positive indication for us that there was a reduction in work of breathing. So that's how we would titrate using this methodology to delay intubation, if possible.
And if you are increasing the rates like that, whether they were tolerating,
Yeah.
because 4 liters, more than 4 liters, if you go, then it becomes dry, you know.
That's why you have the NIV mask on, which already has the humidifier.
Okay.
It works.
Okay. Good.
Very good,
We'll try.
Dilip. Thank
It
you,
will
Dilip.
reduce the work of breathing.
Very good presentation. Last, what you said, I am Dr. Sugadan. What you said is the last mentioned is very informative, and of course, all your presentation was very smart, and of course, I am very sorry to say that this is what is happening in India, in Kerala, and all over the world. But of course, we cannot compare with the US and all. Of course, we cannot compare with some hospital of Bangalore or somewhere, like as you know, Apollo, or some hospitals like Sai Hospital and all. I don't think that. But see, when you compare in Indian standard, as you said, we are managing the people in certain ways, but we have got a so many very good information from you, and at this your age, you have given a very good information. I am very thankful to you. Very thankful to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be a part of this.
Any more questions?
Dr. Dilip Raman, I mean Dr. Santosh Babu, the presentation as usual was excellent. You should be considered as the doctor of the present and the doctor of future. I have seen in the last presentation that you said that any doctor, any medical personnel who doesn't adopt technology will be again, his place will be in the dustbin. So one question to our own president, Dr. Joy, in the relevant to this presentation. IMA Trishur, in the probably in the whole India has presented a tele-ICU concept to the district administration somewhere in March and early April to the district administration to start a tele-ICU with the help of Daya Hospital. The knowledge of the every members of Trishur IMA. What is the status and what happened to that proposal? Dr. Joy, please.
Okay. We have presented it in front of the district collector long back in March, not in April. And I mean, expecting such a surge will happen, and with the help of Dr. Fasil, I think Fasil has told me also, maybe he might have talked about Dr. Dilip only. And after that, nothing, he took it very seriously, but nothing happened. And when no response was there, we again presented this thing to the DMO, District Medical Officer Thrissur, in her chamber. And she also said, everybody said it's a good thing, but nothing happened. We have not much encouragement we got it. And IMA can provide only facilitate the things, and we don't run a hospital. We can be a connecting road between the private and the government sector. And myself, even though under contract, working in a government sector. So I have got, little more approach to the government sector, and I insisted about this thing, but nobody is interested. They are all telling, nobody is expecting such a surge of ICU cases in Kerala, because still I think the virus which is coming to the Kerala is less virulent. Maybe that may be the luck we are having. So anyhow, it didn't pick up, still not yet picked up. And we are talking about tele-ICU, not about CPR and all. What we, as Dr. Sudhan expected, we are talking about tele-ICU. In case of SR, definitely it is going to happen. On the floor, if most of our, intensivists are getting infected, what we are going to do? In Bombay and all, I heard even the house servants and the ordinary nursing students were taking care of the ventilators, even in Europe also, some places, because that is how the ventilator death rate has gone up. It was around, if I am correct, it is around 80% only in the earlier stages, because of the, of course, age is also a factor. Their old age homes deaths are very high. Even we are going to face in Thrissur, where I am in under my health center, there is a old age home known as the Divya Hridayashramam.
Yes.
There out of 300, 150 are COVID positive, and already 4 deaths has happened. And I was being called by the collector and the DMO, and personally asked me to you go and assess the case there. Then I had been there on last Sunday, and today they put me on duty there to take the evening rounds. I was there along with others. And
How
again,
many hours you took to take the rounds? 150?
No, I didn't go inside. Morning I took the youngsters, and today I went in there. I stayed at the gate. I inquired about the patients. I requested 2-3 patients to be transferred to the medical college, and I spent there 1 hour. That's all, and I came back.
The answer of my question is
no, listen, and that is the situation we are going to face here. There, a lot of psychiatric cases are there, lot of Alzheimer's are there.
Yes.
Then autism cases are there, from newborn to 80-year-old people are there staying. 300 to 400 destitutes, you can call it. Once when 150 people are already infected, and even the nurses are running here and there, they are using the PP with half zip down. Then I asked them, what are you doing like this? They said, we are not bothered, because how can we stay in a PP for more than 5-6 hours? They are getting exhausted. Then I told them, nobody is going to look after these destitutes if you people are getting infected. So take care of yourself, be there healthy. And I had to give half an hour talk to them today to make them all right. I said, sentiments has got no role here.
So protect yourself.
Yeah, so protect yourself.
Including you.
Thank you.
But to the knowledge of the members, we should know that the district administration, including the DMO and collector, has never accepted and forwarded this very good proposal, which was also high level of usage.
At the beginning, Fasil has told me, I think Fasil is here around, I think. He was here around. He told us he can make some CSR fund available, but still collector said okay, DMO said okay, but after that, somewhere it got stuck. We don't know.
Sir,
There is a request that the government should know that critical care doesn't, or the ICU management doesn't mean that a ventilator and a monitor is going to make it a critical care unit.
Yeah.
That is something that we should make sure that the administration knows about this. Another thing is that those staff who goes there should be adequately compensated on salary. And so that also I think we should be able to address, because that is one thing that pulls back many of them. The people who is going to Gulf and other places where they get paid, they are ready to go in for COVID wards. But here they are all hesitant because they are not paid the decent salary. And even the salary cut is also there. I think IMA should make sure that those who are involved in this care are enough, they have enough coverage, insurance coverage, enough payment, and also the quality of the environment, as Dr. Dilip had suggested, how the recirculation of air in the ventilation in the ward is, whether that infrastructure facilities are adequate. So these things also should be addressed by the IMA, I believe, because otherwise the government is just pushing you to take all the patients and take all the responsibilities.
Yeah, that is what the government is doing. They had enough time to improve the ICU capacity and acquire ventilators, because we had a very late surge. The other places, the surge started in the March itself. Before March, I think.
What is the condition in Bangalore, Dr. Dilip?
Private hospital beds are essentially, at peak capacity. And by peak capacity, I mean, you will find empty beds, but there are no nurses to take care of those beds. So technically, ICU beds are essentially full. Again, a ventilator, like Dr. Ravi pointed out, just having a ventilator is not an ICU. And in fact, having a ventilator without appropriate nursing is probably a death sentence, because you need someone to manage those settings. So the situation is grim, and I think only time will tell how this progresses. But there are early lessons from different states for Kerala to take those lessons and maybe just sidestep them if possible. So these things like oxygen, nursing, staffing, these are early indicators. And maybe focusing a lot of resources on category A and category B is not probably the most cost-effective idea, perhaps, because the lives saved and the deaths are going to happen in the ICU. They're not going to happen that commonly in category A patients. So that is something that we can, revisit as a strategy.
In your experience, like how many days you will advocate for HFNC and NIV? Like this is by experience, because we are also confused, like when we should go for the next step.
Yeah, this is prevalent in all the Bangalore critical care groups as well. Unfortunately, we saw the same trend in January and February in some of the US ICUs, and it is exactly the same story as happened in India. So we can say we are blessed with genetics, but when it comes to viral related ARDS, it's easily 7 to 14 days, some cases even 20, 22 days, just on continuous oxygen support. Very, very laggard and slow response to come off the hypoxia, even if we prolong the steroid duration. So I think in Kerala also we are likely to see that. And just bread and butter, high quality ICU medicine is what works. We don't see any fancy medicine making a silver bullet like impact. So, supportive care, back care, bed sore, nutrition, physiotherapy, these are the things that are going to save lives.
Okay, my question was slightly different. Like how many days? Like we were also confused actually, keeping the patient in HFNC. Then you go for NIV, and when to intubate. You said the index is there, but what is the maximum period you have kept a patient on an NIV?
Yeah, so this is easily 14 days, 14 days, 20 days. Yeah, that's what I answered in the beginning, is that initial period of hypoxia is very prolonged. You may need to keep them for more than 10 days on HFNC or NIV. Absolutely.
And there is what you have mentioned about the ROX index. I think there is a calculator. You can just enter the what you call the FiO2 respiratory rate, and you can get that index. And those who are on HFNC, and we can make out the failure earliest, right?
Correct. So now so that is the problem we had when we saw a patient with a high ROX index. We went and assessed and see, okay, should we intubate this patient? Now, if we are faced with a place that does not have good nurses, that is when we came up with these ideas of maybe putting in nasal cannula and then adding NIV, because we almost knew that this place intubation would be a complete challenge. So we had to really individualize in those cases. And that's when we found out that these patients are going to be on NIV for 14, 15 days and beyond in some cases.
Have you formulated some bundles for COVID?
Yes, we have some bundles. Well, some of them we just edited it last week after we reviewed more data come in. We have not incorporated any of the therapies like ivermectin or favipiravir, for example, because scientifically we don't know if that is something that needs to be done. So our bundles will typically have things that are cost effective, basic heparin, dexamethasone, remdesivir plus or minus depending on availability. But the bundle is more focused on ICU care, meaning proning, nutrition, physiotherapy, looking for work of breathing, awake proning and sedated proning, both protocols. That is how we have designed the protocol for COVID, those bundles.
Do you advocate convalescent plasma for the COVID? Are you in favor?
So that recommendation is rapidly changing. In the initial phase, if the government guidelines allowed and if they were under an ICMR grant, we would say yes, try it. But right now, that decision again is suspect because of not only the ICMR news that has come out, but also the published data on convalescent sera from JAMA papers and also data elsewhere is very humbling. So COVID is behaving like any other viral pneumonia, unfortunately. And there are some changes, like there are some changes with relation to coagulability and how they respond. But the overarching theme is that immunosuppression is unlikely to work, and it is going to always boil down to bread and butter ICU medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Dilip. I like your word. I like your sentence, like technology won't replace doctors. It's the doctors with technology replace the doctors without technology.
Yeah, it's not my line. It's not my line. I'm happy to steal it.
Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Excuse me. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Please, doctor.
Yes.
I'm Dr. Binu from Amala. We are having a COVID unit here in COVID ICU. The one problem what we face after intubation is that since the lungs are highly compliant, they are getting a very high tidal volume. So to prevent that, to keep that volume for around 8 milligram per kg lean body weight, what we are giving is we are giving more of sedation and paralysis. What is your experience? Will it, because the problem is number of hospital days will be more, and that can create problems, right? For weaning also it will be difficult. So what is your opinion?
Yeah, I think this is a good topic for an entire different talk, but I will address this question because it's an important one. See, in the way we are dealing with this, and I know Gattinoni, for example, has talked about this H and L type. It's a good pathophysiology exercise, but when it comes to bread and butter pulmodynamics, there are some issues there, in the sense that the whole idea for you to intubate the patient when they had a high work of breathing was to cut down the patient-induced self-inflicted lung injury, PCLI. If your goal to reduce injury was the main target, then if you intubate and the patient is still having a high drive and high transpulmonary pressures, you have not done the patient any favors. So in this situation, you are almost forced that when you have intubated the patient because of high risk of PCLI, you are almost forced to sedate and paralyze, which is exactly what the ARDS guidelines and even Gattinoni himself recommended after a few weeks of putting out his H type and L type paper. Now, in that, he gave a compliance cutoff of around 40. And what we are finding out is many of them actually fit this paradigm. If they are having a high work of breathing and we intubated them for that, when we paralyze them to check their compliance, it's almost always below 40. So in those patients, we are routinely proning, paralyzing, and sedating them. Yes, it has an impact on increased length of stay, but the at least published ARDS evidence indicates that that is the right thing to do.
Okay, fine. So that is another problem. What we face is that, just as Dr. Paul has mentioned, and when we put them on NIV, even with a low pressure support, they take a large tidal volume. That itself causes self-inflicting lung injury. There itself, I have to increase the sedation, and that's the only reason why we intubate them and then paralyze and sedate. So that's a big problem for the COVID. That's only for COVID what we see, not for the other H-type ARDS lungs.
That's right. That's right. However, I think one of the theories may be that the loss of hypoxic vasospasm is what is driving this increased work of breathing. And in these COVID lungs, the interesting thing in NIV is that the lung injury is happening during the inspiratory cycle. Whereas in a paralyzed patient, the lung injury happens on the PEEP side of the transpulmonary pressure waveform. And we can talk about this later or even offline. So in NIV, if you're limiting their inspiratory pressure, that will reduce the transpulmonary pressure and therefore the PCL to a certain extent. But that's the best you can do. Once you make the decision that you're going to intubate, you will have to use the usual open lung ventilation methodologies.
So do you do that recruitment manuals occasion, or no, you are not doing it? Recruitment manuals?
No, we're not.
Okay, fine. Thank you for that.
Yes, doctor, absolutely.
So, any more questions? If not, we can wind up the meeting. Okay, Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dilip, and thank you, IMA Thrissur, for bringing him and giving us a good talk. Thank you.
So, thank you, Dr. Dilip.
Roy sir, when we are going to get the cocktails?
I think some of us have already had the cocktails and came for the meeting.
You had the suspicion.
After all, I am a Malayali, so it's okay.
At least one tele cocktail.
Anyway.
Yes.
Dr. Dilip, ഇവിടെ വേറെ വല്ലയിടത്തും കേരളത്തിൽ you have got offers to look after